Welcome back. Now, this week has witnessed a very interesting tussle of agendas when it comes to reproductive health in our country. Well, the spark was the ICPD 25 summit that looked at the overall state of access to reproductive health care services. But some are reading another underlying motive, thinking that development partners are trying to meddle in our value systems, while others feel that this is a genuine look at where we are as a country when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights. Well, let me introduce my guests really quickly to unpack this issue a bit more. To my immediate right is Kate Maina-Vorley. She is the Plan International Country Director. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Next to her is Onesmus Mboya. He's an educator and a church elder as well. And next to him is the nominated Member of Parliament, Honorable Jennifer Shamala. Thank you. Kate, let me begin with you because there's been a lot of reaction to the summit and the presence of this forum, with not many really understanding the premise as to why we're having this. Why the ICPD summit here in Kenya? Why now?
Why now? I think we need to go back to 1994 and the landmark decisions that were made around a program of action that was really transformational in terms of what countries need to do to realize Agenda 2030. And at that time, 179 countries signed up to a program of action that would accelerate issues around women, girls, equality and their rights. And so having the Nairobi summit was really a coming together to take stock of how we've performed. And there has been a recognition that there have been major strides. It's been varying across different countries who've signed up to this program of action. And there was a consensus that we need to accelerate commitments and transforming these commitments into reality, given what we signed up to in 1994. And Kenya was one of those 179 countries that signed up to that program of action. So the Nairobi summit is really just that, to take stock and to look at what really do we need to do to really accelerate that agenda for women and for girls.
So it's not something new. This is something that Kenya has been a part of for years, really, when you think about it. Onesmus, there's been, though, a very negative reception to this summit for various reasons, more leaning towards the morality side of things. What do you think has been informing this fear, if you will, from religious leaders?
It looks very flowery from the top, and you know, it talks about advocacy for this kind of health and reproductive freedom. But the finer detail of it brings out issues that Kenyans feel we are not ready, and they are really out of sync with our cultural and social moral context. Issues like opening up the abortion space, opening up sexual education and consent without the participation of the parent, because that is very clear in some of their documents, that minors can actually begin making sexual decisions and decisions about their reproductive health without the involvement of parents. And opening up things like more freedom for homosexuality and gay rights and the LGBTQ, the whole works. So how they approach this is quite, it is not inclusive, because this agenda is not homegrown. This agenda was not discussed at our level, and they did not seek to understand what are the limits and the context in which we would like to adopt this kind, because we are not saying we are demonizing all these things, but the religious society is saying there is a context, there is a space, there is a moral value system that must be accommodated as we craft this agenda, but the ICPD did not take a stock of that, and they did not involve the stakeholders at that level. And I think that is why there is quite some rejection of the agenda in totality.
What is the current state of access to reproductive health services right now as we speak? Because this is not just coming from anywhere.
Exactly, yeah. The fact is, we have seen an unprecedented rise in teenage pregnancies in Kenya. The fact is, our young people are having sex. Whether we choose to talk to them or not, they are having sex. And to a large extent, they're having unprotected sex. The fact is, the next wave of HIV infection will come from our adolescents, and particularly adolescent girls, and from our youth. The fact is, we still have zero unmet target around gender-based violence and harmful socio-cultural practices around female genital mutilation. So for me, I totally agree with Honorable Shamala in terms of commitments. I think countries made specific commitments. Our president was there and he made specific commitments that resonated with our culture and our values. I think really what we need to be discussing is what we're going to do to take the commitments that our country has signed up to and make them a reality. Because the data is not lying. Our children are getting pregnant. And a lot of our children, our adolescent girls, are seeking backstreet abortions. So what are we going to do to ensure that our girls have the right information to protect themselves and to steer themselves away from unwanted pregnancies? Because the fact is, they're having sex.
ICPD 25 will come and go, as it's shown. These social ills will remain. So what is being done from the morality standpoint, because they can't handle that, from the church's perspective, to address these ills?
It is the prime agenda of the church to empower. The church interacts with the family on a daily basis. And the church has interventions in terms of its evangelistic programs, in terms of its counseling interventions. Churches run schools in this country, and most of the schools in this country are owned by churches. And churches have programs, you know, chaplaincy programs. Churches have extracurricular programs that push this kind of knowledge within a very strict and well-moderated moral context, because we don't believe that exposure is the solution. And I think the approach that we are rejecting is saying that because these things are happening, let's talk about it, let's expose it, let's open a can of information out there and let every child consume it. I don't think that's going to help. So as we speak, I know in the church circles there's a lot of effort going on, and they're not programs that are periodical. That is the daily culture of the church, to have moral conversations with the family on moral issues, whether it is honesty, whether it's chastity, and sexual health. I also agree there's still work to be done in terms of how far the church is going to reach and how bold the church is going to approach these conversations. But I believe it should be managed within a social moral context that we own as a country.
Right.
Victoria, I think the question with it's my considered opinion and very with a lot of humility should be, what are we doing about it? The church, we don't look at this country. Every 1 or 2 kilometers there is a bar. Okay, in every residential area there is a bar, booming music until 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. Who is in those bars? It's the parents of these children. They're not there. Do you know that there's an international convention against children being able to access pornography? It's in the media. They can access it at the touch of a button. The question is, what are we doing about it? And we want the statistics. And I was talking to Kate before we came on air, and she said it was like 50% of girls who are getting pregnant who are under the age of 18. And then there is 50% who are not getting pregnant. Why? What is happening? What are the reasons? This is the conversation we should be having. And I prefer to use the word girls getting raped as opposed to gender-based violence, because these terminologies have different connotations. It's when you say girls getting raped, it is clear, you know, that it's the women who are getting pregnant because men cannot get pregnant. Yes, is what are the issues? That's the question we should be having. So it's not, you can't. It's very unfortunate that whenever there's a problem, that it's our spiritual leaders that who are being called out. We go to church. Muslims go to mosque on Friday. So let's not put it on them. Let us take
we're not operating in isolation. No, I hear what you're saying. And as we wrap up, I just want to hear from all of you in terms of the way forward, because both sides are trying to advocate for something good, a society where everyone can live equally and ensure that they have access to the right services. But from a cultural, religious, and from a development partner aspect, how do we move forward beyond this point? Because it will still be with us, this issue. I'll start with you, Kate.
I do think there has to be a conversation, an intergenerational dialogue about the issues that are affecting our girls. You know, we were just reflecting. Several years ago, you would never have talked about female genital mutilation. It was a taboo. It was considered a norm. And fast forward to where we are now in 2019, I think there's been a national recognition, including from cultural and traditional and religious leaders, that FGM is one of the drivers of gender-based violence, and it is a great violation to girls. And so I think there are some lessons to be learned about how we moved the FGM dialogue to become a national dialogue and the mechanisms that have been put in place to end FGM by 2022. What can we learn from that process and from the intergenerational dialogues that have happened in the spaces where girls were allowed to raise their voice and say this is not what they want for themselves, because it's a precursor to early child forced marriages. Right. So what can we learn from that journey when it comes to the fact that our girls are having sex, they're getting pregnant, 59% of those who get pregnant are unwanted pregnancies. So what can we learn from that journey that resulted in our own president providing leadership from the front? How can we take that journey and translate that to these other social ills that are harming our nation? Great. Onesmus.
I think let me start by saying what I think will not work. And what will not work is the language of pushing back the pushback. Because the pushback is coming from a heavily legitimate cultural and very well-informed moral perspective. So if the organizations like the UNFPA and the ICD conveners and your organizations, their approach I feel they should take should be really multi-societal, where you bring in all the stakeholders. And let's not have this notion that talking about it will be a solution. Talking about it is just a trigger.
It's a first step.
And let's also appreciate that talking about it needs context. It needs certain defined environments. I don't go home and talk to my 6-year-old daughter and tell her, guess what? Girls are getting pregnant. Open your phone, let's look at some pornography and see how girls should excite themselves. And, you know, the kind of education that they're opening up to the youngsters out there, I don't think that will work. I think, like she's saying, let's have a national conversation involving all stakeholders, and let's agree that, yes, there are human rights, there are freedoms, but these freedoms should play within limits, legislative, and some are moral and philosophical limits, so that we understand that these are the interventions, but we appreciate how far we can go. For example, on the abortion issues or on the CSE, let's say that at a certain age, this is the kind of exposure we can give, or this is the kind of empowerment we can give. And I expect organizations that advocate for this kind of stuff to open a bigger conversations in their intervention in terms of not just, you know, giving the information and say we are empowering girls. Let's look at the root cause of the problem. Like she said, we are really exposed to pornography as a society. How are we going to impose or restrict some limits around access to information which is not appropriate for certain ages? How are we going to prepare the boys for this conversation? How are we going to help our boys respect the girls and understand their boundaries? How are we going to help the girls practice restraint and not just say they're getting pregnant because of gender-based violence or rape?
I want to unpack the commitments that were made by the President of the Republic of Kenya. There were 12 commitments there, and the President was very, very careful. And what he did is he took 2 or 3 and then dissected them. And there were only commitments on female genital mutilation, on tertiary education, not comprehensive. What do they call it? Comprehensive
sexual education.
He was very, very careful. Furthermore, it was a commitment, like an engagement between a man and a woman, it can be broken before you actually get married. And the marriage is the resolutions of the United Nations Assembly. I'm certain that this document, which it is just a document, it actually went off path from what happened in Cairo, and several other things were inserted, and I don't want to have that discussion here. That's for another day, and that is why it is being rejected by a lot of countries. So we will see when it goes to the United Nations Assembly. As of now, it is, like I said, an engagement which can be broken.
All right, thank you so much, Kate, Onesmus, and Honorable Shamala, for coming in and unpacking this. It doesn't have to be an acrimonious debate, because we're all wishing for the same ideals at the end of the day. It's communication and ensuring that everyone is playing their part. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And keep the conversation going on social media, #CitizenWeekend. Keep talking and use this as an opportunity to educate yourself as well on such matters. Have a lovely evening. Good night.